Start with the panel discussion itself. I must admit that this panel is broadly is sort of one-sided. I was hoping to get people from Reliance Industries or those who have supported their views in various ways or partly supported their views, and unfortunately we were not successful. Just to put it on record, which must be done, is that we addressed not one but two communications to Reliance Industries requesting them to name a speaker to be part of the panel discussion, and we got no reply till yesterday. Suddenly, the press club got a reply late in the afternoon yesterday saying that we decline your request for two reasons. One, they say that this event is not for a debate, but it is to popularize a pamphlet which Paranjoy has brought up. That's the term used, that you're trying to popularize through an event, pamphlet which Paranjoy got. I think we'll have to start redefining what a pamphlet means. I mean, 500 pages of real hard research has now been reduced to a pamphlet. Paranjoy, congratulations. But anyway, so that was one reason. The second reason was what you mentioned, that the various cases in respect of gas pricing in different courts, ONGC and in Supreme Court and all that. So they wouldn't want to get involved in a discussion on this issue when the matter is in court. So these are the two reasons they've given. We respect that. I mean, again, even after that reply, we addressed to their communicator another letter saying that we'd still welcome you, which they again declined, and they said that in any case we would, since this all concerns law and legal stuff, we would like to record this whole proceeding, videograph the whole proceeding, which we declined, which we said that in case you were participating in the proceedings, one could have considered it, but since you're not choosing not to participate, we declined that request. But we also said that it is being recorded, it will be available on social media, on YouTube. We have a Press Club YouTube channel, so it will be available there. And anybody who wants to access the proceedings can do so. So that's unfortunately, and another two or three speakers who have initially shown interest in speaking, unfortunately, then declined. So I am afraid it's going to be a one-sided discussion, but maybe from the House or wherever we can have intervention. Now, to go straight into it, I would request Mani Shankar ji, who has been in government, who's probably suffered the pain of seeing all this happen before him, to explain to us in a very simple and short way the ins and outs of how the whole question of gas pricing, the treatment to Reliance, and how government has functioned around it. Could I request Mani Shankar ji to give us a little introduction to the subject?
Well, thank you very much. I have chosen to come here today principally because when the book was released, I was in the midst of losing my election campaign by the largest single margin by which I've lost any of the 7 elections in which I participated. The other was that the book got overtaken by another one written by an accidental media advisor. And I felt that therefore I should come in some sense of solidarity with Paranjoy, because I'm most impressed by the extent to which he has dedicated himself to collecting all the facts that he believes are relevant to the argument, putting them together, and attempting, while arguing his case, to give as much exposure to alternative points of view as is feasible for a writer who's writing a book with a purpose. So I think he's tried to be fair to every side. It's not necessary to endorse his conclusions. I doubt that he's called this meeting in order that we all raise our hands in the manner in which we do in Congress party meetings to indicate that we are in support of the resolution. So this is really an occasion to consider an issue that is of very high importance to the country. I became the Minister of Petroleum, to my startled surprise, on the 22nd of May 2004. And on that occasion, I had been told by the Prime Minister one day earlier that he had wanted me in this ministry but that he had been advised that my interest lay in Panchayat Raj, and since he didn't think that that was a sufficiently heavy portfolio, he was going to add to it tribal affairs and culture. And I was in seventh heaven because those were precisely the three responsibilities that had been assigned to me when I was working with Rajiv Gandhi. And I thought here was an opportunity to carry that matter forward. But a few hours later, I got a call from Ahmed Patel saying that I was to take additional temporary charge of the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, and that therefore I must see him before I went to any office the following morning. And I need to emphasize this because right at the start, I had been told that this was a temporary charge and moreover an additional charge. So when I was relieved of this temporary and additional charge at the end of January 2006, that was about 20 months later, I was not sacked from the cabinet. I continued holding the principal portfolio that had been allotted to me. And in a sense, to compensate me for having taken away petroleum, I was given the portfolio of youth affairs and sports, which was a bit odd to do because I'm the only sports minister, I think, in history who's never been on a golf course and doesn't know what teeing off means. I was also given a third portfolio for the development of the Northeast region, and that was undoubtedly the portfolio that gave me the highest satisfaction. So I have to emphasize that I was not sacked from the government. A portfolio was changed which had in any case been given to me on a completely temporary basis. My regret was that in the course of those 20 months, India today had undertaken, I don't know what, some kind of introspection and declared me to be the best minister in Manmohan Singh's cabinet. Even worthies like Mr. P. Chidambaram were left behind, while me, to everyone's surprise, not least my own, was told that I was the best performing minister in the Manmohan Singh cabinet. And a week later, the Hindustan Times undertook a survey in 6 metros and came up with the conclusion that they're still trying to get over that I was the most popular minister of the cabinet of all the others that were there. And so I did preen myself, but I sent a friend in England a message saying, I think this is the beginning of the end. For in politics, when you reach the summit is when your descent to the valley begins. And when you hit the floor of the valley is when your ascent to the top re-begins. So I was not surprised that my second year, or partially a second year, as the Minister of Petroleum hardly had any of the glamour or the joy or the success that marked my first stint. And that was essentially because I had brought a dimension into the working of the Ministry of Petroleum which had not been conceived or elaborated earlier. And that is what came to be known by the short expression, oil diplomacy. I had started going around the world trying to ensure 2 things. Number one, that we could secure sources of supply, given that our own domestic sources were limited. And B, perhaps more importantly, that instead of continuing the confrontation between OPEC as the producers and the IEA, the International Energy Association in Paris, as the consumers, and the dialectic between the two giving an outcome, that here in Asia we needed to recognize that the world of oil and gas had completely changed, and that now not only did Asia have the largest suppliers of oil and gas, but they also had the largest incremental consumers of oil and gas, and that it was as much in the interest of the producers to have guaranteed consumers, given that the West was moving away, as for us to be able to negotiate a price over which we might have some control. Because hitherto the price of oil, with which then the price of gas was linked, was determined by the Western Texas Index. From the name you can see that it relates to the North American continent, and by Brent crude, which was the term that they gave to oil and gas discovered in the North Sea. So I thought we should have an Asian index. And the extant Asian index, which was the Dubai index, had become meaningless because Dubai had run out of oil. They hadn't run out of money, but they'd run out of oil. So it didn't make any sense to try and utilize the Dubai index. We needed something different. And in this light, my attention was focused almost exclusively on ensuring our energy security. And as far as the pricing of energy was concerned, a decision had already been taken that the very small amount of crude oil that we produce in India will be pegged to the international price of crude oil. So there was no argument there. Whatever the sheikhs and the blue-eyed sheikhs did to oil prices would get reflected in whatever we did. And therefore, there was no issue of pricing oil. As far as gas was concerned, I asked a question in my capacity as an unrepentant and unredeemed socialist. I asked the question as to why we can't control the price of gas. And I was solemnly told that according to the new economic policy, licensing policy, the NELP, the price of gas will be determined through price discovery in the market by a transparent process at arm's length. I want to repeat that. That the price of gas will be determined through price discovery in the market by a transparent process at arm's length. So I heard this jargon and I requested my secretary to please translate it into English. And from what he told me at that time, what I understood was that a producer of gas would have no restrictions placed on him by the government as to the price at which he would sell it. He would get the price which the market was willing to bear. But given that by that time, the largest private producer of gas was effectively selling it to himself, it was necessary to stipulate that this would not be a cozy private arrangement, but one which reflected the market reality. And accordingly, LNG, liquefied natural gas, which had been imported by ONGC from Oman, am I right? Oman, Qatar, from Qatar, that after you imported it it was bought for a price of $1 FOB, and by the time you brought it to India, and then you converted it back into gas, and then transported it to the consumer, the price had come out as $2.34. And the arrangement between the two Ambani brothers was at exactly the same price. So all considerations set out in the principle that was adumbrated to me had been fulfilled. There had been price discovery in the market because the buyer was willing to pay that price. It was also easy to establish that it related to the price at which anybody could sell gas in the Indian market. And it was clear that it was not a collusive price because there could be no collusion between NTPC and ONGC. And this price was the same as between ONGC and NTPC. So it fulfilled all the criteria. And I was able to say that therefore I have nothing to do with the price of gas. What I have to concern myself is the price at which the petroleum products that come out of gas and oil have to be determined. And I thought I had been given that temporary charge in order to end my political career within 3 weeks, because I was required within 3 weeks to announce an increase in the price of our petroleum products. That is, I had to learn this, that petrol in the Ministry of Petroleum is called motor spirit, and kerosene is called superior kerosene oil. I've forgotten what diesel is called, but it has some
HST,
funny
high
name.
speed diesel.
High-speed diesel. And that mitti ka tel, as I said, SKO, which I think means superior
Superior
kerosene oil.
kerosene oil,
So I
correct.
had to learn all these terms. I knew nothing about them. But I argued that the principle on which we should raise the prices of petroleum products for the consumer is on the principle of equitable burden sharing. That there was going to be an increased burden as a result of what some Arab sheikh or some Norwegian was going to do. And that therefore, if it went up by 10 rupees, should all the 10 rupees be borne by the consumer? Or should some of it be borne by those who are making rentier profits, principally the oil producers of India, who were doing nothing but gaining simply because somebody else had raised the international price of crude? So they should take a burden, that the central government's exchequer should take a burden, and we therefore sharply cut down the import duty that was then being imposed on crude oil and raised the export duty on petroleum products. And then we said the third person who should take a hit are these refining companies, that they should take up some of the burden as well, because they were going to be compensated in some way for the price at which they were buying it from the upstream producers. Then there should be the state governments, which impose heavy taxes on petroleum products, that they should take some of the burden. And when all these, the burden is being distributed among all these four entities who can afford to pay, then the consumer would be left bearing whatever remained. And I don't know whether I was lucky or whether I was persuasive, but I succeeded in carrying out 2 or 3 price revisions without serious damage to my reputation. The only problem was when I once remarked that given the difference between the price at which LPG is produced and richer households are getting it, and maybe the house should give up buying 1 sari a year. I got it in the neck from my wife for that, because apparently buying saris is crucial to one's existence on the other side of the gender divide. And I got it in the neck. But apart from that one blip, I succeeded in surviving. And this was because there was general recognition that the NELP and the decision to, in a sense, convert the ONG commission into an ONG corporation took place in a situation where the price of oil was $10 a barrel. And it was agreed that there would be no further government control over the prices of petroleum products. The market itself would ensure that these were supplied at a reasonable price. What had not been anticipated was that by the time I was made minister, the price of oil would go up from $10 a barrel to nearly 30. And that was regarded as such an outrageous price that my first press conference as minister was in the company of the Saudi ambassador, who solemnly informed the Indian press that Saudi Arabia desired that prices of oil should be in the range of $25 to $27, because otherwise major consumers would find a substitute. And he was prophetic, because that's exactly what has happened. Shale oil and shale gas have come on the market, and Saudi Arabia is left without a really reliable consumer. And this is also the fate that has overtaken several other countries, because a lot of gas is coming in from the Russian Federation into Europe. So the need to purchase oil and gas from Asian producers has declined on the part of the Western countries. And so in a sense, I was justified in guessing at that time that we really needed an Asian oil and gas community from which we could go further forward. Although it was a distant dream, it seemed to me that a main job of a minister is to have distant dreams and not to get too involved in the nitty-gritty of administration. He should know about it, but he doesn't need to be himself hands-on on these things. So it was in these circumstances that I was able to run those 20 months, focusing on oil diplomacy and having as the chairman of my little group of foreign service officers Hamid Ansari, whom destiny had kissed on the brow to become the Vice President of India later. But with these friends of mine from the Foreign Service, and much to the annoyance and anger of the Ministry of External Affairs, which did everything that they could to trip me up, we found ourselves, with permission from the cabinet, the Prime Minister in particular, to get on with a project that caught the imagination of the country and which gave me the honors that I received, which was the Iran-Pakistan-India pipeline. And today we are in a position which we weren't perhaps in 2004 to think of extending that pipeline to Iraq to make it an IIPI, EP, and in fact to take it to an EPIC, because if we were to run it across the breast of Mother India and through the Stillwell Road, we could be in China. That's the extent to which it is feasible in theory to have an Asian gas grid. And we now have TAPI, which was then being poo-pooed by the External Affairs Ministry. But at that time, the argument of our MEA non-experts, because I'm afraid they get involved in things they don't understand, was that there was not gas enough in the Daulatabad field of Turkmenistan. So I met Pervez Musharraf at that time, and I said that if there isn't, I'm sure there's plenty in Uzbekistan. So we make TAPI into UTAPI. And I said, if that's not enough, there's plenty of gas in Kazakhstan. So we make it Kutapi. And we arrive up at Astrakhan in Russia on the Caspian, and it becomes Rukutapi. And if we move further south on the Caspian, we'd arrive in Azerbaijan, whose oil field, whose gas field in the Caspian Sea was called Chirag. That's the extent to which we are connected with Central Asia and have forgotten. So it will become Arukutapi. And I loved Pervez Musharraf's response to me. He said, perhaps it'll work. After all, the vowels and the consonants are falling into place. So it was feasible for us to think of these things. It was also, while I was minister, that we succeeded in spudding the first gas well and working towards an imminent opening of the oil well in Sakhalin, in the Russian Federation, on the far east. And we'd worked out, or at least in principle we'd worked out with Japan and Korea, that our share of that oil and gas could go to them. And in exchange, the arrangements that they'd made in Sumatra to get their gas from there as LNG, we could get it into our country, closer than all those countries are. It would be a kind of swap deal. So there were all these exciting possibilities. I'd been and examined the BTC, that is the Baku-Tbilisi-Jehan pipeline, which passes through some of the most politically dangerous territory that any of those three countries have to face. Because all these Muslim republics of the Russian Federation, South Ossetia, Abkhazia, these are all alongside Georgia, which is a Christian country, and Azerbaijan had already been in war with Armenia. So there was a Muslim-Christian angle there, which complicated matters. And then the pipeline ran through the Kurdish part of Turkey, which has been in continuous revolt for decades now. And Jehan, in fact, is at the southern end of the Kurdish part of Turkey. If they could do it and set up measures that would ensure security, then surely the Iran-Pakistan-India pipeline was feasible. So these were the kind of issues with which the ministry was wrestling. And we didn't have to bother about pricing. So I must distance myself from a conclusion which apparently is there in this book, that I was sacked because of something that I had said about the pricing of gas. The pricing of gas was not an issue I give you your opportunity, was not an issue in January of 2006 when I was removed. The issue of the pricing of gas came up on the 1st of April. Now, it may have been there in the minds of others 3 months earlier. I don't know. But as far as the record goes, I was asked to leave at the end of January because mine was a temporary post. And I was asked to give up that temporary post at the first cabinet reshuffle that took place after May 2004, which was in 2006. There was only one person who was asked to drop his portfolio, that was me. And I think only one minister got a portfolio that he didn't have before. That was my good friend Murli, who has regularly received me next door to this press club. In fact, I thought I'd come to the wrong place because I saw Congress flags everywhere. I was delighted that if nowhere else in India, at least in the press club of Mumbai, the Congress flag is flying. Anyway, I was asked to go at that time. But then, as a bystander, I watched what happened. And I saw this principle of us not being involved in gas pricing being breached. After all, I shared that jargon with you because it was relevant to the story. That jargon is still the jargon of NELP. And because it was the jargon of NELP, the NELP that I ran as minister received the largest number of bids that any NELP has ever received. And it included every single major oil producing company of the world. Every one of them. There was no one who was not present, whether from Canada, the United States of America, Europe, France, Italy, Britain. They were all there. There was a sense that if oil can be priced at international prices, and if gas is to be priced at what, you can't have an international price for gas, but you can have a domestic price for gas, at least along the network of the pipelines, that means that we can determine ourselves whether we win or lose on a given investment. And it also was connected to the fact that two major discoveries had been made in the year before I became minister. One was onshore at Rajasthan. And that was done by Cairn, near Bardmer. And they came to me and they said that they have a practice abroad of naming their oil wells after Greek goddesses. But in India, they have decided to do it after Indian goddesses. So who was my Isht Devata? So I said to them that, I'm an atheist, so I have no Isht Devata or Devti. What do you call them? Devi. But I said that, my mother had a name which is particularly appropriate for what you're doing. She was called Bhagyam, which means good luck. So why didn't you name your newly found well Bhagyam? They did. It's the largest producing oil well in Rajasthan. So thank you, Amma, for what you've done for us. And offshore, we had the Reliance discovery. And the Reliance discovery was being bruited about as a huge discovery, leading to my brother, whose columns are read rather more avidly by all of you than anything I write, saying that given these figures, it's not necessary for us to think in terms of importing gas. And the only dissenting voice I heard was that of the late Subir Raha, who kept saying that until the DGH certifies it, you're not allowed to publicize what you think is the size of your well or the potential output that's to come from that. But since it was not Reliance who was doing the propaganda, but others, there was no way in which we could fault Reliance. It was in fact the stock market behaving in the lunatic manner in which it normally works. So we left it at that. There was no issue to be taken up. However, after the 1st of April, the attention of the Ministry of Petroleum shifted. The first thing that the new minister had done was to dissolve the oil diplomacy group without even sending a letter of thanks. So I had to beg him, and ultimately he wrote a letter to Hamid saying, thank you for the assistance you gave us. And attention changed to the pricing of gas. And in that process, the Supreme Court said something which is unimpeachable. They said that the natural resources of India belong to the people of India. And therefore, the democratically elected government of India, elected by the people of India, can determine the price at which it is to be disposed. But the government, that government, in exercise of this power, had decided on that arm's length, my price discovery, the transparent process, and so forth. So the NELP was fundamentally based on price discovery. That was how people were enticed to come in. But when the Supreme Court reiterated the obvious truth that the natural resources of India belong to the people of India, and therefore the government determined what the price would be, there was a fundamental alteration of the basis on which we were going to seek domestic energy security. And our ministry, therefore, has become more and more the Ministry of Petroleum and Gas Pricing. Whereas I think the national need now is to make it the Ministry of Petroleum and Gas Security. For without security in this particular sector, all our dreams of economic development are ill-founded. It's necessary to have that security. Which means two things. One, that we concentrate on discovering more in India. We have gas hydrates in the Bay of Bengal, but we have no technology to make them commercially exploitable. We have underground coal bed methane. We are not doing enough to take forward the assistance that the Russian Federation gave us. They had discovered this technology in 1927, and we are still to commercialize it in India. We have problems of petroleum discovery that are unique in the world. Our problem of onshore oil and gas began 60 million years ago when the island of Gondwana broke away from the Antarctic and unfortunately floated past Madagascar, just as Madagascar's volcanoes started spewing their lava. That's what killed the dinosaur. But all of that fell on Gondwana, and today it's called the Deccan Trap. There's no part of the world which has as thick and as widespread a layer of volcanic rock and lava as does the Indian Deccan. And we have to find a technology to go through all that. In the Indian Ocean, in the Arabian Sea, I'm sure there's many Bombay highs, but we have to drill at depths of 100 or 10,000 at 10,000 meters, whereas in the North Sea they're drilling at 150 meters. That's why I said to the captain of that Norwegian rig, I said to him, why do you call this the North Sea? In India we'd call it the North Lake. And if we can find, as we have done, gas and oil off the Krishna Godavari basin, then it's available off the Kaveri basin, it's available off the Mahanadi basin, it's available off the Sundarbans, and if they can find it off the Arakan in Burma, which is a much poorer country than ours, why can't we get around with finding all this here? But that means the Ministry of Petroleum has also to be the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas Technology. And the ONGC should be going back from Dalal Street to Tel Bhavan, Dehradun. Because that's where they did the miracle of discovering that we had oil in Ankleshwar. When the Brits had told us that you have no oil anywhere in the world, in India, except in Digboy. So instead of the focus being on energy security, since about 2006, it's been about pricing. And since we really have only one major player in the private sector, since all the others have run away, they've either not continued or they've not shown any interest in coming back, the Ministry of Oil Pricing has effectively become the Ministry of Reliance Affairs. Because they are the major producer whose pricing of gas has to be determined. Now, all this arises from our translating the constitutional provision that gas is the property of the people into saying that therefore the government will determine the pricing of this commodity. And we're doing it in order to ensure that what gas we have found is actually extracted. And in the process, we have discouraged others from coming in to find gas that might be available somewhere outside the Kaveri, the Krishna Godavari basin. So I'm not sure that this is helping us. It is perhaps necessary for enabling the producers in the in the Krishna Godavari basin to be able to give value to their product. But I would imagine that the market would respond to that, and that the market, needing the gas, would be buying it at a higher price, as they do everything else. I mean, you know, buy tomatoes at today's price. then I do imagine that fertilizer companies could buy gas at the price that would be determined by the market at that stage. And then it would be a separate matter that the budget comes in order to dampen the adverse consequences of this for our poorer consumers. That's the model. But we seem to have determined that it is for us to determine the gas pricing. Hence, all these complications that have arisen. We've already gone to, or we've gone in principle to about 4 times what was the original price discovery. There seems to be some idea of moderating that just now. But the point in principle is, should the Ministry of Petroleum be concentrating on energy security or on energy pricing? I think that is the fundamental question that needs to be answered. And in the light of the importance of fossil energy for our economic development, I am a bit surprised that a Minister of State should be in charge of petroleum. Because the Minister of State concerned is somebody whom I know quite well, because we both worked on the Standing Committee on Rural Development. So if he was made Minister of State for Panchayat Raj, I'd be throwing my pagdi in the air. But he in the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, does it mean that the Prime Minister is going to take an overriding interest in this question of energy pricing? And is that what is really required by the country's priorities? I think the Prime Minister is very crucial to energy security in the sense of being able to leverage his diplomatic position in the international community to get us more and more sources and to bring us all closer together and establish a kind of security network for energy in Asia. Yes, that requires the Prime Minister's backing, as I got it when I started the Iran-Pakistan-India pipeline. But at a more operational level, I would certainly plead for this ministry to be in the hands of a cabinet minister. And I think then we would signal the world that we really can business when it comes to the NELP and when it comes to energy security. Thank you.